Hi, welcome to this special class on Unacademy YouTube platform. So, we are discussing about Indian economy for the preliminary examination. So, what we have seen yesterday was the monetary policy and what kind of monetary policy that the government of India has been following, or for that matter, Reserve Bank of India has been following. What are the problems with that monetary policy? And what are the solutions? This is what we have seen yesterday. And yesterday, some of you have asked a question about the bad bank also. What is this bad bank? When Raghuram Rajan was the RBI governor, he has mooted this idea of what we call a bad bank. What is this bad bank? There was something called asset reconstruction company. At that point of time, it was called asset reconstruction company. As we know, the NPAs of banks are going up, which is impacting their credibility, which is impacting their ability to give loans because of what we call evergreening of loans also. That is the reason why, in order to make sure that the banks, have a sufficient amount of money with themselves to give as credit, in order to make sure that banks can clean up their accounts, and also in order to prevent what we call evergreening of loans. This idea of asset reconstruction company was mooted. Later in this year's budget, our finance minister has also spoken about creating a bad bank. As the name itself indicates, this asset reconstruction company, also known as a bad bank, would take away all the NPAs of the public, all the banks. The banks are expected to transfer their NPAs to these bad bank. For example, an industrialist has defaulted on a loan to the tune of say 1,000 crores. What the bank would be doing is that they would be selling this loan to this asset reconstruction company or a bad bank to at a discounted rate. 1,000 crores of low piece loan would be sold to this bad bank for around say 700 crores or 600 crores. The bank is expected to take the haircut. And it is this asset reconstruction company or the bad bank which will try to recover this money from the concerned industrialist. What is the objective here? The objective here is that the banks do not have to spend their resources and time on recovering those loans. Second, once these NPAs are removed, automatically it will improve the balance sheet of the banks. Third, it will also stop this evergreening of loans. Fourth, it will also encourage the banks to provide more loans also. With this objective, the government of India had come out with this new instrument called bad bank. Now, the question here is, what we have to look at here is that the question is whether this bad bank can provide solutions. Of course, either this bad bank along with IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, can help in what we call banks improving their financial position. But at the end of the day, solutions like bad bank can only be, at best, we call them as temporary solutions to structural problems. That is what we can say. They are temporary solutions to structural problems. What are the structural problems that we are talking about? Politicization of the functioning of banks, crony capitalism, complete the absence of transparency in the functioning of the banks, failure of RBI as a regulator, and there is no prudential norms that are followed by the banks while giving loans, and failure of the banks to notify the NPAs on time. And these are all what we call the structural problems. These are all the structural problems. And most importantly, there is no accountability in the banking system. There is no accountability in the banking system. So, if you have to find solutions to these structural problems, as we say, it cannot be done with the help of ad hoc measures like bad bank. Instead of that, what we require is good bank rather than bad banks. These bad banks can offer temporary solutions without addressing the core of the problem. What is happening at this point of time is due to this nexus between the businessmen and bank officials and politicians. Banks are giving huge amount of loans without having any collateral securities. And this automatically loans would transform themselves into what we call non-performing assets within a very short period of time. So automatically this process of giving loans in a discretionary ad hoc manner has to be stopped. We must strictly follow what we call the Basel norms. We must scientifically evaluate the operational risks. Why? Because at this point of time, banks are giving most of the loans on the basis of what we call DPRs, without having any, what we call collateral assets. So obviously, most of the time these DPRs are flawed. There is no way that a bank can evaluate the DPR in scientific terms. DPR means detailed project reports. Most of the time, the people who take the loans will always try to inflate their future revenues, but in reality, it will not be going to happen. That is the reason why, as suggested by these Basel norms and as suggested by Stiglitz committee, also, what the banks must do is they must have experts, from the industry, who can evaluate scientifically the viability of the projects. That is most important. Second important reform, as we discussed yesterday, we spoke about these things also. The 4 R's suggested by economic survey: recognition of the problem, then reforming the banks, recapitalization of the banks, and restructuring of the loans. These 4 solutions should be implemented. On the other hand, in India, as we always see, as we always do, we always focus only on coming out with ad hoc and temporary solutions to structural problems. The government is still not willing to separate the ownership from management. And of course, privatization of banks also can be a solution. Privatization of banks can also be a solution. Recently, the government also had opted for merger of banks. Now, what is the problem with the merger of banks? If you are merging a performing bank with a non-performing bank, overall, it can improve the balance sheets of the banks. But does it improve the work culture? Does it improve the efficiency? That is a big question that we have to ask. Another question that we have to ask here in the banking system is, should we have more banks or less number of banks? As I said, in a country like America with around 35 crore population, they have hundreds of banks. In India, what we are moving towards is only having a few banks. So is it the solution? That is also the question that we have to ask again. And another thing that we have to ask again here is the question related to the way the loans are given, both by public sector banks as well as by private sector banks. As you can see, what happened with the ICICI Bank. What we call is this structural corruption. This is where we have to be extremely careful. Forensic audit should be done regularly. The auditing done by internal audit done by the banks is not the solution to the increasing NPAs of banks. What the banks deliberately do is they deliberately hide their NPAs to provide wrong kind of information to the markets. There must be third-party audit that should be done regularly within the banking system. Forensic audit should be done to ensure more transparency and accountability within the banking system. And the banks also will have to look at their collateral securities, and most importantly, they have to follow the Basel norms also. Most importantly, they have to follow the Basel norms also. And one more important thing that we have to remember here is that the basic problem with our banking system is that the government always uses these public sector banks to implement its populistic policies. One of the important reasons why we do not find the government's really enthusiastic about the privatization of the public sector banks is that the government will always use these public sector banks to achieve its welfare objectives. I'll give you one example here how these welfare objectives of the government are coming in the way of effective functioning of the banks. The Prime Minister last year has started so many welfare schemes during the Corona times. And we had these mudra loans, as all of you know. These mudra loans are given to people, living below poverty line. All of them are given the street vendors, vegetable sellers. All of them are given a loan of around 50,000 rupees, so that they can improve their business activities. And banks were asked to give these loans, especially the public sector banks. They were asked to give these loans to all these small traders without any collateral securities. And they are given. What happened? Automatically, within a very short period of time, all these loans had become NPAs. At this point of time, the major problem of our banking system is these mudra loans. Of course, the government is trying to cover up all the issues, that's a different thing. These structural weaknesses are the ones which are impacting our banking system. This is where the problem is, and this is where the government has to be very clear about what it wants to with the banks. It is the government that is making most of these public sector banks inefficient by forcing them to implement the welfare schemes of the government. The loan melas that the government is regularly conducting. That is where again the banks are facing so many problems. Automatically they will become inefficient. And another important aspect about the financial system here is, this is what I keep on saying, you have to understand all the interlinkages. That is where it will be useful for you in terms of analyzing the economy. After liberalization, privatization, globalization from 1991 onwards, what did the government of India has done is that most of these DFIs, developmental financial institutions, were closed by the government of India. Some of them have been converted into banks. ICICI, it was converted into bank. Unit Trust of India was converted into Axis Bank. Then you had this IFCI, again was converted into a bank, India International Financial Corporation of India. So most of these DFIs were converted into banks. Normally, what was the arrangement earlier? The arrangement earlier was that the commercial banks, both public sector and private sector banks, were expected to provide short and medium term loans to the private sector. This is the arrangement. Whereas these DFIs, development financial institutions, were expected to provide long term loans to the private sector for infrastructure development and industrialization. So what happened? With the closure of these developmental financial institutions, these commercial banks have been given another responsibility of providing long-term loans to infrastructure and industrial purposes. Please remember, this is where you talk about the mismatch in the banking system. As I keep on saying, these are all the structural issues impacting our banking sector. Commercial banks attract deposits which are only small and medium term in nature. If I am depositing my money, it is for current account purposes immediately, or a savings account, or fixed deposits. These fixed deposits will not be for more than 5 or 10 years, right? That is what we say short and medium term. Whereas this industrialization and in infrastructure purposes require long-term loans, 20 years, 25-year loans, because these industrialists, they are expected to invest the money in infrastructure, and they will get the revenues over a period of time. With that revenues, they will be expected to refinance the loans. But the banks are attracting deposits which are only short and medium term, and they are giving loans which are long term in nature. This is where you can see the mismatch. So after 10 years, if a bank, I'm investing my money in fixed deposit, after 10 years, the bank will be expected to return my money, the principal amount, along with the rate of interest that the bank has promised. But if the same amount of money is given by the bank, for industrial purposes, the bank will be getting that money after 15 or 20 years. This is where the mismatch in the accounts of the banks between the credit and debit. Automatically, what is happening here is this mismatch has resulted in increasing NPAs. It has resulted in reducing the flexibility of the banking system to provide the loans. This is where the problem had come up, right? Then what happened? What was the solution that was offered? Then Since these DFIs were no longer existent, in the place of these DFIs, we had private sector mutual funds that had come into existence in place of these DFIs. And what did they do? They were providing these long-term loans to the industrialists. When the banks' NPAs have increased, when the NPAs of the commercial banks have increased, when Raghuram Rajan was the RBI governor, the Reserve Bank of India was putting a lot of pressure on the commercial banks to recover the loans. So what did the industrialists do? They took these loans from the mutual funds in the market and they repaid the loans. Because of which what happened? Artificially, the NPAs of commercial banks had come down for a short period of time. But did the loan burden get reduced in the process? Obviously not. So these mutual funds and other development financial institutions that had come into the existence, what happened? Over a period of time, they had collapsed also. Causing huge amount of damage in the entire financial system also. The loan burden was transferred, but not any kind of changes in the debit market. That is where the problem had come. As we say, these are all the structural issues in our financial system, and we have to come out with long-term solutions. So, in this year's economic survey and budget, the government of India had spoken about coming up with long-term solutions. One, the government of India has spoken about a bad bank. As we have discussed just now, whether these bad banks can be providing effective long-term solution or not, it's a million-dollar question. Second one is the government of India also has said that the government will be reviving these DFIs, Development Financial Institutions. That is a good step on the part of the government, so that we can overcome the mismatch between the deposits and the loan market in the financial system. So this is what we say about bad banks and the financial markets and everything else. So from this, let us move on to other aspects. Let us move on to other topics in our syllabus. As we are saying, you can see here, today we can be discussing inflation and international trade. So, if you have any doubts, you can ask regarding this financial system, or else I can proceed. So, let us look at this inflation and international trade. Again, two very important topics. So, what are the things that we are discussing here? We will be discussing what is inflation, what are the different types of inflation, what is inflationary gap, what is deflationary gap, what is disinflation, and what is deflation. Then, we will be discussing reflation, Phillips curve, stagflation, headline, and core inflation. These are all the topics that we shall be discussing. Let us look at all of them. Let us see all these topics. Right? Let us look at all these topics. What is the simple definition of inflation? Good number of questions are asked in our prelims from these topics. What is the simple definition of inflation? The simple definition of inflation is too much money chasing too less number of goods and services. Very simple. The price of any commodity is determined on the basis of demand and supply. And when will the people demand more goods and services? They will demand more goods and services when they have more money. So there is always a positive correlation between money and price level. When people have more money, automatically they will demand more goods and services. And when the supply remains the constant, automatically the prices will increase. Just because we are demanding today, it does not mean, it does not mean that we can increase output immediately. The demand has increased, the output has remained the same. Automatically, what we find is only inflation. That is what is called inflation. Inflation means continuous increase in the general price level of a country over a period of time. That is what we say about inflation. Let us proceed and look at the other things. What are the different types of inflation that we talk about? Right? What are the different types of inflation? As part of this, what are the other important concepts related to inflation. So the first one, as we say here, is inflationary gap. What is this inflationary gap? Please remember, again, all these questions can be asked in your prelims examination. Some of them were already asked also. What is this inflationary gap? It is very simple. It is the difference between the expenditure and the production of goods and services in the country. It is the difference between the total expenditure of the government over the national income of the country. It is the difference between the total expenditure of the government over the national income of the country. Basically, what we call it as the fiscal deficit. This is what we call inflationary gap. Now, why do this inflationary gap matters? What is the reason why the government, as we discussed, is spending more amount of money? What is the reason why the government is spending more amount of money than what is the GDP of the country? For the simple reason that the government is spending this amount of money to increase the demand, to provide goods and services to people, to improve infrastructure, for industrialization, and for defense, for disaster management. As we studied with John Maynard Keynes, when the government spends this money, it is called autonomous investment. It can result in what we call a virtuous cycle, where the government investment can provide jobs to the people. When it is providing jobs to the people, there will be more income in their hands. When there is more income in their hands, they will be demanding more goods and services. When they demand more goods and services, supply cannot be increased overnight. So the prices will go up. When the prices go up, the profits will be going up for producers. When the profits are going up for producers, they will be increasing their production. They will increase the investment. They will also employ more number of people. Again, you will be going into the same virtuous cycle. You will be going into the same virtuous cycle. That is the reason why this inflationary gap is very important, especially for a developing country like India. It is the gap between the expenditure of the government and the GDP or national income of the government, the fiscal deficit. On the other hand, when we talk about the deflationary gap, this is what exactly opposite of inflationary gap. This is the deficit of the budget compared to the GDP of the country, national income of the country. That means the government will be having what is called a surplus budget. This deflationary gap is followed mostly during the times of what we call overheating of economy. The government wants to reduce its expenditure. The government wants to reduce income in the hands of the people by increasing the taxes, so that the expectations of people will be less, the demand for goods and services will be less, the prices will be coming down, economy will be stabilized. This is what we call a deflationary gap. Next important concept is disinflation error. What is this disinflation error? Disinflation means the next one is disinflation. This disinflation means decline in the rate of inflation over a period of time. This is what you have to be very careful here. Disinflation is different from deflation. When we talk about disinflation, very simple. Last year at this point of time, say in the second week of August, inflation was say around 8%. That means the increase in the price level was around 8%. This year, it is only 6%. That is what is called disinflation. Right? That means disinflation is about a reduction in the level of inflation over a period of time. That means prices are increasing. That is what we have to remember. Prices are increasing, but the rate of increase in the prices is coming down. That is what we call disinflation. I give you the example. Last year consumer price index was very high. This year compared to last year it is coming down. Disinflation. On the other hand, deflation means overall decline in the prices. For example, last year, say the price of rice is say around 20 rupees per kilo. If this year the price of rice is 18 rupees, that is what is called deflation. This is what we call deflation. Deflation means, as we have mentioned, overall decrease in the price level. When do we find this kind of deflation? We can find this kind of deflation during the times of recession and depression, when the prices are coming down. During the times of recession and depression, when you can see the prices are coming down. Then, the next concept that we have to look at is this stagflation and Phillips curve. There is an economist called Phillips. He had come out with this relation between inflation and unemployment. Please remember, Phillips curve was asked in our preliminary examination also. What did he say? He said that there is an inverse relationship between high levels of inflation and low levels of employment, low levels of unemployment. What did he say here? It is very simple to understand. He said that when the inflation is very high, what happens? It means that the profits of producers are going up. When the profits of producers are going up, what do? They will try to invest more. When they are investing more means they will be employing more people. So high levels of inflation are always associated with low levels of unemployment. This is what Phillips has said, popularly known as Phillips curve. High levels of inflation are always accompanied with low levels of unemployment. Basically, he was extending this Keynes pump priming analysis. Let the government put more money, it results in inflation. It results in what you call virtuous cycle. Initially, the prices will go up, but this increase in the prices can ultimately help in reducing unemployment. This is the strategy most of the countries around the world had followed from 1950s onwards. You are trying to ensure rapid economic growth and reducing unemployment by following the strategy of increasing in the expenditure of the government. But in reality, this was not the case. In reality, it did not happen. In 1970s, most of the developing countries around the world followed this strategy of high expenditure, high growth, and high inflation and low unemployment. But in reality, it did not happen. Why? Because this high inflation was followed by stagnation in economic growth rates. So the country suffered on two counts. One is very high levels of inflation, because of which people have been forced to go below poverty line. Second one is stagnation in economic growth. Why this stagnation in economic growth? Because this high amount of expenditure on the part of the government did not translate itself into high outputs. It was based on the assumption that there is a positive correlation between outlays and output, which is not the case in reality. In developing countries, they were facing so many structural issues related to output, in the form of no integrated markets, in the form of low capabilities of labor, in the form of high incremental ICRs, incremental capital output ratios, in the form of non-availability of technology. These structural bottlenecks have ensured that developing countries could not increase their growth rates with increasing the expenditure of the government. On the other hand, what happened? Increase in the expenditure of the government resulted in very high levels of inflation. you know, resulting in what is popularly known as stagflation. Stagnation in economic growth plus inflation. And this is what exactly now we are saying about Indian economy also. Indian economy has got saturated. We have achieved 9% growth rate long time back till 2011. After that, we have never realized this 9% growth rate. On the other hand, what is happening? We are witnessing very high levels of inflation. Even now also you can see here, after this corona pandemic, the country is witnessing very high levels of inflation along with the stagnation growth levels. What are the solutions? As we discussed, we have talked about some of the solutions, but we will talk about more of those solutions as we proceed also. Then, we have to look at the other, types of inflation, which is called reflation. What is this reflation? This reflation again can be linked to what we have just discussed now. The government is deliberately increasing the prices. The government is deliberately increasing the prices so that it can revive the economic growth. It can help in providing employment to the people as part of what we call this Phillips curve. But it did not happen in reality. Then we have to look at this headline inflation versus core inflation. Headline versus core inflation. Again, very simple here. Headline inflation. What is this? Again, please remember these were asked in our prelims. They will be definitely be asked in our prelims all the time. What is this headline inflation? When we talk about headline inflation, as the name itself indicates, whenever we see increase in the prices of these goods, they will be part of the headlines in the newspapers. What are the prices of those goods which become part of headlines in the newspapers on the front pages? Increase in the prices of food items, increase in the prices of vegetables, increase in the prices of oil, increase in the prices of petrol, diesel, gas, because they are the ones which are which determine the which determine the standard of life of a person living at the ground level. For him, it does not really matter what is the increase in the price of petrol or what is the increase in the price of iron and steel, what is the increase in the prices of other commodities. For him, what really matters is the increase in the prices of onions. In India, as we study all the time, election results are always influenced by the prices of onions. In 1979, Janata Party was in power. Between 1977 to 1979, 2.5 years they were in power. What is the reason why Janata Party had lost elections very badly in 1980? For the simple reason that they could not control these onion prices. The prices of onion have reached very high levels. That is the reason why normally onions bring tears to the people when they cut them. They bring tears to politicians when they hear about the prices. After that, Janata Party could never come back to power. Again, in 1998, elections were held to Delhi State Assembly. At that point of time, BJP was in power, and Sushma Swaraj was the Chief Minister of Delhi at that point of time. And suddenly, the prices of onions have reached 100 rupees per kilo. After that, we are talking about 1988. Now we are in 2021, right? In the last 23 years, BJP could not come back to power in Delhi. That is the power of onions, the power of inflation. That is the reason why the government of India, whether it is central government or state governments or even local self governments, the most important thing that really matters to them, that really bothers them, is this headline inflation. The prices of commodities which are used by the people in their day-to-day life. That is what we call headline inflation. And what we must remember here is that this headline inflation can be highly volatile. For example, take the price of the vegetables. During the season of monsoon, sorry, during the season of winters, sometimes they can come down. During summer seasons, they will go up seasonal. So that is the reason if you want to know the real rate of inflation in the country, what you have to do is you have to take out this volatile prices, volatile commodities to find out about what is called core inflation. That is the reason why we come to the concept called core inflation. And what do we say about this core inflation? What we say is that this core inflation calculates the movements in the prices of the commodities which are relatively stable over a period of time, unlike the food items and other items which are part of headline inflation. This core inflation helps the government to come up with the policies related to growth and infrastructure and investment and everything else. So this is what we say about headline and core inflation. Proceeding further, then you have to look at what are the different indices of inflation. You have to look at how this inflation is calculated. In India, we talk about calculating inflation with the help of two different indices. One is wholesale price index, second one is retail price index. Why do we have two different types of indices? Now we are talking about the producer's price index also, PPI. This wholesale price index is important because here we will know about the prices of commodities which are there in the godowns. How the prices have changed. The government of India has opted for 2012 as the base year for this wholesale price index. Nowadays, in recent times, the government is planning to change the base year also. 2012 is almost 10 years back. So obviously, it loses its relevance also. At present, as you can see here on your slides also, there are around 697 items that are there in this wholesale price index, right? And there are 117 items related to primary articles, fuel and power. There are 16 items, and there are 564 items of manufactured products in the wholesale price index compared to 318 items earlier. And what is the objective of this wholesale price index? The government will come to know the movements of the prices of these commodities at the level of manufacturing, so that the government will come to know actual increase in the cost of production. That is the objective of wholesale price index. And as opposed to wholesale price index, what we have is also called consumer price index. So this consumer price index basically captures the increase in the prices at the level of consumer. Why? Because you go to wholesale markets, the price of onion in the wholesale market can be, say, 30 rupees per 1 kilo. When you buy the same onions in front of your house, they can be 50 rupees. These 20 rupees can be transportation charges. These 20 rupees can be storage charges. These 20 rupees can be the profits of the retailers. So for a person on the ground, what really matters is consumer price index. That is the reason why the government of India also calculates the consumer price index, right? As you can see here on the slide, changes in the prices at the producer level are tracked by the wholesale price index, while CPI captures the changes in the prices of goods at the consumer level, right? And this is where that is the most important thing. And the government follows this last year's price index. Those who have studied statistics, they know these weighted indices to calculate wholesale this consumer price index. What the Reserve Bank of India in recent times has decided that in order to come out with the monetary policy, they would take into consideration consumer price index. Earlier they were taking WPI, but it was decided that they were taking consideration consumer price index, and they said that the tolerable rate of inflation is around 4%, with flexibility of 2% either this side or that side. That means within a band of 2 to 6%, Reserve Bank of India has the freedom to come out with its monetary policy, especially related to repo rates and reverse repo rates. If the consumer price index is above 6%, then Reserve Bank of India has to enter into the market and reduce the money supply by increasing the repo rates and reverse repo rates to control inflation. In the last few years, what we can see here is that in the last few years, there has been so much of controversy regarding the role of central bank. Should the central bank focus on ensuring rapid economic growth during these times of recession, or should the central bank focus on controlling the prices? Especially for a developing country like India, this is the big dilemma because we are experiencing at the same time both stagnation in economic growth as well as high levels of inflation. So what is the solution? It has been ultimately decided that the central bank will focus more on controlling the prices. If the government wants to increase the GDP growth, it has to be done through fiscal policy than with the help of monetary policy. That has been decided. There have been so much of conflict between the finance ministers and RBI governors regarding this. When Subbarao was RBI governor and Chidambaram was finance minister, Chidambaram would keep on telling Subbarao all the time that he must reduce the repo rate and reverse repo rate. That was the time when India was experiencing very high levels of inflation. And the same thing happened with Pranab Mukherjee also, when Pranab Mukherjee was the finance minister. And the situation had come to such a pass that when in a global financial meet, Pranab Mukherjee, finance minister, was there along with Subbarao, RBI governor, who was there. Pranab Mukherjee never really bothered to wish RBI governor also. This kind of conflict between the finance minister and RBI governor had become more personal also. Subbarao, who was finance secretary, when he retired, had become RBI governor. You can see the differences here, conflict here. As finance secretary, Subbarao would always tell the RBI governor to reduce the repo rate and reverse repo rate. The moment he had become RBI governor, he would change his tune. He would say that he would not reduce the repo rate and reverse repo rate. This conflict was there when Raghuram Rajan was there, and again Chidambaram was there. When Raghuram Rajan was there, when Arun Jaitley was there as finance minister. Now, in order to overcome all these conflicts, the government of India, RBI, had come out with what is called MPC, Monetary Policy Committee. This Monetary Policy Committee, MPC, will decide the changes in the repo rate and reverse repo rate. And even they do not have any kind of freedom also. As I have mentioned, the tolerable rate of inflation was decided at 4%, and RBI will have the leeway in terms of 2% on either side. If it crosses 6%, RBI will have to only look at controlling inflation. Let the government take care of the growth rate in GDP. And this is what is happening all around the world also. Even in America also, Federal Reserve Bank governor always would say that his primary job is to control inflation. Let the government think about what we call economic growth. Ultimately, it has been decided that RBI governor would think more about controlling the inflation rather than the growth rates. Even now also, the latest Monetary Policy Committee meeting, if you happen to read it in newspapers, one of the members of Monetary Policy Committee had expressed his dissatisfaction with RBI, saying that RBI should focus more on controlling inflation. The present RBI governor was former finance secretary, and he was more flexible compared to previous RBI governors, whether it is Raghuram Rajan or Subbarao or other RBI governors. So the present RBI governor is focusing more on reducing the repo rate and reverse repo rate so that it can give a major fillip to the economy. But thanks to increase in the inflation in recent times, RBI governors simply do not have that kind of flexibility in terms of reducing the repo rates and reverse repo rates. And as we proceed with this inflation, what do we say here? RBI's monetary policy, and we are again looking into the analysis here. What we are saying here is that RBI's monetary policy can be successful only when inflation is what we call demand pull inflation. We say that there are two different types of inflation, cost push inflation and demand pull inflation. There is increase in the price of the commodity because of increase in the cost of production. If you look at the global level also, since the 2000s, what the globe had witnessed was cost push inflation. The prices of food grains have increased in exponential terms during this period. That was the reason why Indian agriculture also benefited a lot because of increase in the prices of food grains. At the same time, this period also witnessed a huge amount of increase in the prices of crude oil. I'll give you one example to explain these things. In 1996, as late as 1996, you will be surprised to know the price of crude oil per barrel was hovering around $15. 1.5, I'm talking about $15. By 2011, 2012, it has reached $150. This is what we call cost push inflation. Increase in the price of commodities due to increase in the cost of factors of production. This kind of cost push inflation, nobody can do anything. We cannot do much about these things. That is the reason why in these times of cost push inflation, what we can say is that in the times of cost push inflation, monetary policy will be completely ineffective, because as part of monetary policy, what the RBI governor would be doing, he would only be increasing the repo rates and reverse repo rates, but that will not have any kind of impact. I gave you the example of Subbarao, who was the RBI governor at that point of time. Subbarao, what did he do? He kept on increasing the repo rates and reverse repo rates. For 13 successive quarters, he increased the repo rates and reverse repo rates. They have reached 12%, 11%, 12% also. But did the prices come down? Not at all. Why? For the simple reason that inflation was not because of what we call demand pull factors. It was because of cost push factors. That is what we say. RBI's monetary policy can be effective only when inflation is because of demand pull factors. What do you mean by that? Demand pull factors. It means that the increase in the price level is because of increase in the demand for goods and services, which is because of increase in the incomes of the people, which is because of increase in the money supply within the economy. That is when the Reserve Bank of India can do is reduce the money supply by increasing the repo rates and reverse repo rates. And that is also the reason why at this point of time, if you look at India, even if RBI increases the repo rates and reverse repo rates, inflation might not come down because of increase in the prices of petroleum products. What happened with the increase in the price of petroleum products? Suddenly, the prices of all essential commodities, food items, and then oil, transportation, everything went up. This is what we call cost push inflation. And if you happen to read the newspapers, the government of India hopes that this kind of inflation will be integrated with the economic system, and over a period of time, if you happen to see today's newspaper also, it has said that the RBI is expecting, the government is expecting that this inflation will stabilize at some level. That is what they are hoping. Right? This is what we say. Ultimately, RBI's monetary policy can be effective only when inflation is due to demand pull factors. And we keep on saying, inflation is a very sensitive, politically sensitive issue. Not only that, economically also it has adverse consequences. Why? Because if the inflation goes up, what happens? Automatically, your exports also would become less competitive in the international market, because the prices will increase. As we study with one of the important economists in international trade, David Ricardo. What did David Ricardo say? He said that international trade is carried out mostly because of what is called a relative advantage. Adam Smith spoke about absolute advantage, whereas David Ricardo spoke about relative advantage. So what happens here is that relatively your prices, your goods are more efficient than the goods produced by other country. Relatively the prices of your goods are less than the goods produced by other country. I will give you one example here again to explain these things. Everything is related. You can see inflation and international trade. I will give you one example here. Take the case of this jute industry in India. Jute industry in India. Traditionally, India and Bangladesh are major exporters of this jute. During the British times, also cotton and textiles jute industry was mostly concentrated in Calcutta and Dhaka. So after that, Bangladesh was separated and it had become. So normally, let us assume that America is importing this jute products from India and Bangladesh. In India, the inflation level is very high, because of which cost of production has increased, and on top of it, the taxes are also very high. So what happens? The prices of these products, of jute producers in India, have increased in comparison to the prices offered by Bangladesh. Then what will America do? America will simply import from Bangladesh and not from India. And that is where inflation can have a huge amount of impact on your exports also. When your exports come down, please again go through the cycle here. Because of inflation, your exports are coming down. When your exports are coming down, your foreign exchange earnings also will be less. When your foreign exchange earnings are less, automatically you will face balance of payment crisis also. So everything is interrelated here. So this is what we say about inflation and other aspects related to that. From here, as you can see here, we can move on to what is called this international trade. We can move on to, from inflation, we can move on to this international trade, right? So if you have any doubts, you can ask. Otherwise, I can move on to this international trade, balance of payments and international trade, right? So let us move on to this balance of payments and international trade. As usual, first let us look at all the concepts, and then we can get into this analysis. So what are the concepts that we have to learn here? We have to learn about balance of payments. We should know about current account. We should know about capital account. We should know about FDI. We should know about FII. We should also know about ECI, external commercial borrowings. We will also try to learn about nominal and real exchange rates, and then fixed and floating exchange rate, convertibility of currency, depreciation, devaluation, appreciation, and revaluation. These are all the concepts that we will try to learn. Most of you might know these concepts. That is the reason why I will go through them, in a very speedy manner, so that we can focus on, we can focus on analysis. There are two things we talk about here: balance of trade and balance of payment. Balance of trade means exports minus imports, whereas balance of payments is a much bigger term. It includes both physical products as well as services. For example, if I am exporting iron ore, it is a physical product. On the other hand, if Infosys is exporting its services, it is also earning foreign exchange. That is what we say when we talk about the balance of payments. It includes both physical goods and services as well as physical goods as well as services. And what is this balance of payments? You will know the amount of revenues that you are getting from your exports. You will know the amount of revenue that you are getting from your imports. And the difference between the exports and imports of all kinds of revenues, not only exports here. A government can earn foreign exchange through various resources. What are the ways in which the government can earn foreign exchange? You can earn foreign exchange through exports. You can actually earn foreign exchange through remittances. Your people will be there in foreign countries, they are working and they are sending the money to India. You can earn foreign exchange through these investment, both FDI and FIA, direct investment as well as institutional investment. You can also earn foreign exchange through tourism. People from other countries come to your country and they will bring in these dollars with themselves. Right? You can earn foreign exchange through tourism. You can earn foreign exchange through health purposes. Nowadays, health tourism in India has become very popular. For example, you take the case of United Kingdom. If you want to have bypass surgery in United Kingdom, you have to wait in that NHS, National Health Service. You have to wait for 1 or 2 years. Before that, you will happily die also. If you have to get the same thing done in the private hospitals, they will take away your heart also. So that is the reason. What do people of United Kingdom do? They come to India. They get the treatment in India. What we call it as health tourism. And you can also foreign exchange through foreign aid. Other countries are giving you aid. Then you can also earn foreign exchange through what we call loans also. Of course, you have to repay the loans with rate of interest. Right? So balance of payments includes all these things. Similarly, how does the foreign exchange go out of your country? Foreign exchange will go out of the country through imports. If you are importing something from other countries, it will go through. Similarly, the multinational companies in India, when they earn profits, they repatriate those profits to their parent company. Similarly, Indians going abroad for health, education, and other purposes. Similarly, Indians visiting foreign countries for tourism purposes. In the same manner, India is also giving loans to foreign countries. For example, India has given a huge amount of aid to Afghanistan in terms of in terms of dollars. We are also giving loans to our neighbors. So this is how foreign exchange outgo will be there. Balance of payments include all these things. Whereas balance of trade, when we talk about it, it only talks about exports and imports. Balance of payments is a much bigger term. Please remember again, all these questions are repeatedly asked in our prelims. Then current account and capital account. Current account and the capital account. Very simple again. This current account is like revenue expenditure. Capital account is like capital expenditure. When you are talking about this, spending your foreign exchange on current account purposes, for immediate purposes. For example, on your education, on your health, you are going to foreign countries, and on tourism purposes, on repayment of the loans, the interest that you are paying, for the loans you have taken, on your current, imports. This is what we call current account. Capital account means a long term. For example, FDI capital account, then external commercial borrowings capital account, and you are investing in those countries capital account. That is what we say about capital account. So when we talk about India, when we talk about convertibility and when we talk about India, what do we say is that after liberalization, privatization, and globalization, what we have done is that we have what is called full current account convertibility of rupee. What do we mean by that? If you are going to America on tourism purposes, if you are going to America for education purposes, you can get the dollars that you can get those dollars without any kind of a problem. You can take those dollars, $5,000 from SBI and other banks. It is not at all problem. For current account purposes, it is fully convertible. Whereas, in spite of the recommendations of various committees, the government of India has decided not to have full capital account convertibility. For example, Indian banks are not allowed to invest in the stock markets of foreign countries. Indians, if they have to invest in foreign countries, that investment has to be done with the help of RBI. What RBI will do is that they will look at each and every foreign investment proposal and they have to give permission, then only you can invest. For capital account purposes, our rupee is not fully convertible. And it is said that India has escaped the 2009 global recession because we did not have what we call this capital account convertibility. Please remember, before that, in the first decade of this millennium, IMF and World Bank kept on demanding that India should have full capital account convertibility. And the same IMF and World Bank have lauded India, saying that because India did not have full capital account convertibility, they could escape with the 2009 global financial crisis also. Our banks were not allowed to invest in foreign stock markets, because of which our banks could escape the collapse of the markets like what happened in the Western countries. That is the significance of a capital account. Nowadays, in order to attract more investment, the government is easing the restrictions on capital account because of the fact that we have a very good, reserve. We have very good reserves of foreign exchange dollars. The government can afford, but again, the government is also very discreet in terms of deciding this capital account convertibility. So this is what we say about what we call current account and capital account. Foreign direct investment. The simple definition of foreign direct investment is that when a foreigner, a company or an individual comes to invest in your country, in your physical assets, it is called foreign direct investment. How do we differentiate between FDI and FII? Very simple. If a foreigner is investing in terms of buying more than 10% of the shares of a company, this is very important. Again, these questions were asked in your prelims examination. If a foreigner is buying more than 10% of the shares of the company, it is called FDI. Why? Because under Indian Companies Act 1956, which was later amended in 2013, if you buy more than 10% of shares of a company, you will become the director of the company. So it is called FDI. On the other hand, if you are buying less than 10% of the shares of the company, it is called FII, Foreign Institutional Investor. So this is what we say. I think the time is up for today. We can stop this lecture, and we will try to continue tomorrow. Tomorrow we will continue. We will complete this international trade. We'll look at the present status of international trade in India. Then we go to the next topics in our syllabus. Right? If you have any doubts, you can ask. Otherwise, we can meet tomorrow at the same time. Right? Okay. If that is the case, then we can meet tomorrow at the same time, 12 o'clock, and look at other topics. Till then, take care of yourself.